stop trying to change them. And there's a difference between satisfaction and resignation. Satisfaction means people are getting what they need, right? And silence in a system is not a sign of health. It's a sign that people have stopped believing that change is even possible. Because function isn't the same as health. And efficiency isn't the same as connection. They're just quieter. Quieter doesn't mean healthier. It means that people have accepted the gap.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Everything's quiet. There's no fights, there's no tension, there's no pushback. You've been interpreting that silence as confirmation that things are working. And if something was wrong, you'd hear about it, wouldn't you? But if someone were unhappy, would they say something to you? And if there weren't any problems, would it actually even surface? But here's what you might not be seeing. Silence in a system doesn't mean that it's healthy. It means there's been adaptation. And adaptation isn't the same thing as alignment. It's what happens when people stop expecting things to change. We're approaching this as a final episode of our Act 1 of this season, and it's been about why the absence of complaints might be the most concerning signal of all that you have to deal with. So let's start with a question that most men don't ask. Why is no one complaining? Not theoretically, but actually. Your spouse isn't bringing things up anymore, and your kids aren't asking for more, and your team at home seems content with just the way things are. And you've read that as things are going well. They're actually good. But there might be another explanation. Things just aren't good. People just stop trying to change them. And there's a difference between satisfaction and resignation. Satisfaction means people are getting what they need, right? But resignation, that means people have accepted that they're not going to get what they actually need, and so they've adjusted accordingly. And in high-functioning systems, resignation often looks just like satisfaction, doesn't it? Because high-functioning people don't complain when they've decided complaining is just useless. They adapt. And so let me show you what this looks like. Let's start with our marriage. Early on, your spouse, she brought things up. Small frustrations, concerns, things that she wanted to talk through. And maybe you engaged with some of them, but over time, she brought fewer things up. And this wasn't because there were fewer things to bring up, it's because bringing them up didn't actually lead to any change. And so what did she do? She stopped. And you read that as, hey, she's happier now, so things must be better. But what actually happened is she lowered her expectations to match what you were willing to provide. Now that's not satisfaction, that's adaptation. Let's look at your kids. When they were younger, they asked you for your attention constantly. They wanted you to play, to read, to be present with them, to do things. And maybe sometimes you were. But over time, they started to ask less. Not because they didn't need you any less, but because they learned that to get what they needed, they'd have to go elsewhere. From their mother, or maybe from other activities, and maybe just from their friends. And so you read that as they're becoming independent, so that means they're fine. But what actually happened is they adapted to your unavailability by needing you less. That's not independence. Again, that's adaptation. Now let's see what this looks like at home overall. There used to be friction. People would push back. They would express dissatisfaction because people wanted things to be different. And now, it's silence. And you read that as we've found our rhythm because everyone is content. But what's actually happened is people have decided pushing doesn't change anything. So they stop pushing. Now that's not contentment, is it? That's actually resignation. So here's a question. What are you mistaking for satisfaction that's actually resignation? And here's what most men don't really understand about silence. In healthy systems, people surface concerns. They actually bring up what's not working and they push for what they actually need. So of course they're going to express dissatisfaction when things are off. Maybe not dramatically, but consistently. Because in healthy systems, people believe that their input actually matters. And so they believe bringing something up might actually lead to some form of change. Because they believe their experience is actually worth voicing. But in systems where the input doesn't lead to change, people stop giving input. And it's not because they don't have any concerns, but because voicing a concern has proven to be completely pointless. So the concerns, they just go underground. And what you're left with is silence. And silence in a system is not a sign of health. It's a sign that people have stopped believing that change is even possible. So let me give you some concrete examples to hopefully drive this point home. Your spouse, she stops initiating difficult conversations. Not because there aren't any difficult things to talk about, but because past attempts just got deflected, dismissed, or just led elsewhere. So she decided, why bother? The issues are still there. She's just stopped bringing them up to you. And you're interpreting her silence as agreement. It doesn't mean agreement. It's actually exhaustion. How about your kids? They stop asking you to show up. And it's not because they don't want you there, but because asking felt worse than your absence. Because asking and having you declined, distracted, or unavailable taught them that it's not a good time to ask. So they stopped. And you interpreted that silence as, they don't need me as much. But they still need you. They've just accepted that you're not going to be there and give them what they need. How about your home overall? It's operating smoothly without your emotional presence. And it's not because emotional presence isn't needed, but because the system learned to function without it. In your family, they built routines and patterns and expectations that don't require your full engagement. And you interpret that as smooth operations, as everything is actually working. But what's actually working in a system is designed to compensate for what you're not providing. So here's another hard question. Where have you mistaken efficiency, compensation for actual health? An even harder question, can you identify the moment when people stopped pushing? Not vaguely, but specifically. When did your spouse stop bringing certain things up? When did your kids stop asking for certain things from you? And when did the friction in your home decrease? Most men just can't pinpoint any of those because it didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually, one declined request at a time, one deflected conversation at a time. It was one pattern of unavailability at a time until people learn this is how it is. This is what available actually looks like. And so they did. They adjusted. They recalibrated all of their expectations and they stopped hoping for what wasn't coming. And so the system, it got quieter. And here's what that process looked like. It started with a request. Someone asked you for something and your presence, your attention, maybe your engagement. And that led to stage 2 of disappointment. Request just isn't met. Or it's met inconsistently, or it's met with resistance. That led to stage 3, repeated attempts. So they try again, several times, hoping this time will be different. That led to stage 4, acceptance. This is when they realize that this is the pattern, this is what is available, hoping this won't create any more pain. And so finally, stage 5 was adaptation. They stopped asking. They stopped hoping. They built a life that works without you, where before they're even asking. And actually, finally, it was silence. And this is the stage that you realize that you interpret that silence as everything being fine. But everything is not fine. Everything's just accepted. And accepted dysfunction feels calm until you realize you've lost that total acceptance. And so question, who in your life has moved from pushing to silence? And what does that silence actually mean? Here is the most dangerous part, that high-functioning systems can operate at a very high level while being fundamentally misaligned. Because everyone is doing their part. Responsibilities, they're covered. Things actually are getting done. But the connection is completely absent. The intimacy is absent. The depth is absent. And because the system is functioning, you don't even know what's missing. So let me show you what a high-functioning dysfunction actually looks like. Your marriage functions. You communicate about logistics. You coordinate schedules. You make decisions together. You co-parent effectively. But you're not connected. You're not intimate. And you're not vulnerable enough with each other. You're operating more as business partners who share a house. And because the business runs smoothly, you don't notice the partnership is completely hollowed out. How about in your family functions? Everyone gets where they need to be. Homework is getting done. Activities are managed. The house, it actually runs. But no one's deeply engaged with each other. Everyone's doing their tasks, but no one is truly present. You're operating as a logistics team. And because the logistics work, you don't even notice the family isn't actually together. How about your home functions? There's no chaos. There's no conflict. Everyone is actually civil. But there's also no honesty. There's no difficult conversation, and there's definitely no vulnerability because there's no depth. And so you're operating as roommates who happen to be related. And because there's no visible dysfunction, you don't notice the real absence in the relationship. And this is the trap that high-functioning systems fall into. They can run for years smoothly, efficiently, without obvious problems while completely missing the point. Because function isn't the same as health. And efficiency isn't the same as connection. And silence definitely isn't the same as peace. And so question, where is your life functioning well, but missing what actually matters? And here's what really gets lost when people adapt things instead of getting what they need. And so here's what gets lost when people adapt instead of getting what they truly need. Trust erodes, and it's not dramatic, and it's not sudden. It just happens gradually. And every time someone brings something up, doesn't lead to change, then trust erodes just a little. And every time someone asks for something and doesn't get it, then trust erodes a little more. And every time someone tries to connect and you're unavailable, trust erodes just a little bit more. And over time, that erosion adds up, doesn't it? Until people, they just stop trusting that you'll show up any different. They're just going to accept, this is who he is, and this is what I get. Let's look at intimacy. Because intimacy requires us to be vulnerable, doesn't it? And vulnerability requires trust that the other person will meet you. But if people have learned you won't meet them, then they stop being vulnerable. They stop sharing what's actually real. And they stop bringing their whole selves. They just bring a version of themselves that's safe. And intimacy that dies quietly. Connection then becomes transactional. And when people stop expecting emotional engagement, the relationship, it becomes completely transactional. You exchange information, you coordinate the logistics, you fulfill your obligations, but you don't actually connect. And transactional relationships feel empty, even when they function smoothly. So then resentment, it builds. And this is a dangerous one, because resentment doesn't announce itself, does it? It just accumulates. Every unmet need, every deflected conversation, every time someone adapted instead of being met. See, resentment builds, and you don't see it because people, they aren't complaining. But silence doesn't mean resentment isn't there. And it just means that it's gone underground. And so question, what resentment is building in the silence that you're mistaking for peace? So let's bring this all the way home. We've spent 8 episodes recognizing the patterns that you'd rather not see. You've gaps that we've been explaining away, a drift that we've been calling temporary, avoidance that we've been calling peace, logic that we've been using as armor, and modeling that we've been unaware of, that achievement just isn't that satisfying. And now, the silence you've been mistaking for health. And here's what all these episodes have in common. They're about the gap between what you believe is true and what is actually true. Between what you tell yourself and what's really happening. Between what you intend and what you're actually creating. And recognition, that's just the first step. It's not the solution, it's not the fix, and it's not the resolution. It's just seeing it. And so another question, what can you no longer unsee? What explanation is no longer working? And what does silence in your life actually mean if it doesn't mean everything is fine? Silent doesn't mean nothing's wrong. It just means people have stopped believing that things would change. So, as we've been saying, they've adapted. They've lowered their expectations. They've built systems that compensate for what you don't provide. And they've learned to need you less. And you've interpreted all of that as that things are better now. But things, they aren't better. They're just quieter. And quieter doesn't mean healthier. It means that people have accepted the gap. So this is the end of our first act. And we've spent these 8 episodes focused on the recognition, seeing what we'd rather not seeing, acknowledging what we have been explaining away. And so naming what's been hiding in completely plain sight. And so now you're going to have a choice. You can just keep explaining, or you can let recognition become the action that it should be. Because recognition without response is just awareness with better vocabulary. And awareness, that doesn't close the gap, does it? It's decisions. Decisions do. And so we're going to get into Act 2 of this season. It's going to be all about friction. And it's the friction between what you now see and what you've been tolerating. It's about the friction between what you say or who you say you are and who you're actually being. And it's a friction between knowing better and doing differently. So I want you to stay with it. The Band of Brothers is where recognition becomes your action. And if you're ready for that, you know what to do.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the Brotherhood that is the Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.